Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where our goal is to make you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is March 18th, 2026. And before we dive in, standard disclaimer, nothing here is investment advice. Do your own due diligence. And today's guest is the CEO of Verdera Energy, a company focused on the development of in situ recovery uranium assets in New Mexico. It's Janet Lee Sheriff. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Well, I want to get started by getting your overall assessment of the uranium market at present. What are the main catalysts driving uranium that you're watching right now that you think people should be paying attention to?
Well, I think we live in very interesting times, and the situation with Iran is changing things quickly, very similar to how everything changed with the Ukraine situation. And I think people need to be paying attention to the growing domestic need for uranium, the growing push for a nuclear renaissance in the United States. The United States is the world's largest consumer of nuclear energy. They consume 48 million pounds a year. They produce, thanks to a select group of companies that are now producing, they can only produce a few million pounds a year. So they're very reliant on other countries for this source. And what I see in these changing times is an administration that's very focused on bringing mining back, bringing manufacturing back. But it takes time. You've got to change the regulatory process. It takes time to build out. So I think people need to I think people are already paying attention to AI and the data centers. Small modular reactors, yes, but the U.S. does not have the enrichment facilities that it had in the past. So, there's a lot of work that the government needs to be doing on conversion and enrichment, and extraction of uranium is there. The resources are there. We're self-sufficient in the 80s. We can be again, but there's regulatory change that they need to pay attention to.
Yeah, great summary, and I completely agree on deregulation of the industry. That's something that needs to happen for things to move forward. Now, I want to talk about the structural supply deficit in the uranium market because we are already in a deficit in terms of the amount of uranium mined per year versus reactor demand. There was a lot of inventory overhang post Fukushima. Of course, there was the megatons to megawatts program post Cold War, which also left a lot of pounds above ground. But now we're in a situation where the vast majority of that inventory has been depleted, and we are in a deficit. Analysts forecasting a structural uranium supply deficit up ahead. How do you think this could affect the price of uranium and related equities?
Two separate questions. How does it affect the price of uranium? I think the price of uranium is one factor. The price of SWU, the standard work unit, is also something that's often overlooked. And when the two of them move together, that's when we're in an extremely good environment. So SWU, for the benefit of people that may not know, is the standard work unit, that amount of energy that's necessary to enrich uranium. And if you look back historically, '04 to '06, they moved together. And then for many years, people kept thinking this is the time, this is the time, this is it. But it wasn't. It was because SWU wasn't moving. So now we saw SWU move. Today, I'm not sure where it is, but I think that's something that people should learn about and that they should pay attention to. When those move, that has a positive impact on uranium. Equities, I think we live in a very interesting time globally. There's risk in other countries that are imposing a lot of regulations or taking on projects or stepping into that ownership issue. The U.S. has, with some people, been an issue that it was too risky. But what I'm seeing now is more of an interest in bringing it back. So I think people need to pay attention to that, and that will have an impact on the equities. Canada has always been great about the Athabascan Basin. So I think people just need to really look at the jurisdiction. I think that's extremely important. We always look at resources, but look at the jurisdiction, and you've got to look at management. That there's been such a deficit in the sector because there was no interest. It was always being outsourced to third world countries or countries that may or may not now be our allies. And we really lost a talent pool. So I think you really need to look at who the people are behind companies and invest in the right people.
Speaking of the equities, they've been extraordinarily volatile in recent times, often rising and falling by high single digit or even double digit percentages in single trading days. Now, this makes it very hard to stomach for a lot of retail investors, particularly those who aren't experienced in the sector. What are your thoughts on this volatility, and do you expect it to smooth out as we see more capital, perhaps institutional investment, enter the space, and the idea of this uranium bull market perhaps become more mainstream at some point?
Yeah, I think it's been a painful few weeks for a lot of people, and I don't think it's isolated to uranium. The broader market's been going through a lot of fluctuation, and it has to do, I think, with a lot of the actors outside the sector. And Iran, again, I raised that, but increasing conflicts with other countries. An administration that, thankfully is really wanting to focus on its sovereignty and bring back manufacturing and mining. But, we're up against a bigger world. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of uncertainty in the market and a lot of variation. If you look at gold stocks, they're back to prices when gold was 2000. It's a sign of the times. I do believe the long-term strategy for uranium and nuclear is very strong, and it's being patient. You don't build out nuclear reactors in a few months. You do them in a few years. You don't take uranium from the yellow cake and turn it into energy immediately. It's a 2-year process. So I think it's tough for people that want to see more immediate gains. And really, it's a time when you have to have patience, and you have to see where this is going and where this current administration, the previous administration was very pro-nuclear as well, but we're seeing it push. Watch your energy bills. People's energy bills are going higher. Nuclear is going to have a better impact on energy bills. It's a cheaper, safer, cleaner energy source. So it's going to be there, but sometimes it takes time to get these things going.
Well, we have recently seen some big deals on the table for the uranium space. Recently, a $2.6 billion agreement between the Indian government and Cameco for 22 million pounds of uranium starting in 2027. We also saw a long-term uranium supply contract with India's Department of Atomic Energy and Kazatomprom, representing over 50% of Kazatomprom's book value. Now, that is still pending shareholder approval. But are these kinds of deals signs that countries, governments are starting to wake up to the importance of uranium and nuclear energy?
I think so. And I think you're going to see more of it. One of the things that I think people aren't really paying a lot of attention to right now, and sometimes it's a bit of a sensitive topic, but the U.S. has a need for military purposes. And I'll use the example of a nuclear sub. This depletes over time. So sources have to be renewed, and you can't renew them from external sources. It has to be domestically produced for military purposes. They also have an energy reserve for nuclear. There's things that I think particular to the U.S. that people should be paying attention to. And I do think that there's going to be a lot more of these transactions going on. You hear about countries that were opposed to nuclear, Germany, that are switching their positions now. So and again, it takes time.
Well, let's discuss how Verdera Energy fits into the picture. You recently started trading on the TSXV under the ticker V. Can you start by giving us an overview of the company?
So Verdera Energy is focused on advancing its very solid projects in New Mexico. We have 400 square miles of private mineral rights. These were known as the checkerboard lands with the Santa Fe Railroad. So when they put in the railroads, they granted the railroads every alternating section. So that included the mineral rights. So with our acquisition from Encore, we acquired those. And we have 4 projects that have 88 million pounds of known and historic resources. Crown Point was our qualifying transaction when we went public, so we updated the 43101 there. And we'll be working to advance 2 of our other projects, West Largo and Ambrosia Lake, through 43101 as well. New Mexico is extremely important to the U.S. nuclear renaissance. The Grants Uranium District produced 40% of all the uranium ever produced in the U.S. If New Mexico was its own country, it would be the 7th largest producing uranium district in the world, but it's often forgotten. And so we came in 10 years ago. We actually looked at going into New Mexico. We met with the Navajo Nation that it wasn't time. 2 years ago, we decided it was time. And we started doing the community engagement work necessary to get to the place where Verdera is now. The other thing that's really interesting about Verdera is with Bill Sheriff as the chair, Bill has the largest privately held data collection in the U.S. for all commodities, Ranchers, Union Carbide, Getty Oil. But Verdera now has acquired and compiled the largest uranium database for the state of New Mexico. And we acquired the Kerr-McGee database, one of the largest uranium producers historically in the U.S., and the URI database. So we have the data from across the state, not just our own projects, which you obviously wanted, but this is a huge value add to the company as well.
Let's talk about New Mexico for a moment here, because you mentioned you were there a decade ago, you decided it wasn't time. Now, this is a jurisdiction that has had opposition to uranium extraction. So what are the risks there at present? Has the situation changed? And if there are risks, how are they being managed?
So, yeah, really good question, Jesse. New Mexico is extremely important to the U.S. nuclear renaissance. It has the largest resources, and its resources are very thick and wide and big. So if you look at for example, Wyoming or Texas, they're more sinuous, river-like, spaghetti-like, good resources. But New Mexico, they're big. And in the past, New Mexico was in the 50s to 70s. There's a lot of uranium extraction that was done by conventional means, that underground open pit. That was pre-EPA and pre this very strong regulatory environment that we find ourselves in now. And it really wasn't good for the land or the people. And there was negative impacts. So that left people with, we just don't want it. What we've done to come in and address that is we're not focused on conventional at all. We're focused only on ISR amenable projects. So for the benefit of people that may not know, it's wellfield technology. There's contaminated aquifers, the uranium's in it. We use wellfield technology to extract it in liquid form. We don't use chemicals. We only use water and oxygen, and remove as much of the uranium as economically possible. Educating people becomes extremely important. We are not going in. We set up the Clean Energy Association of New Mexico. We're having a big conference in April. We've been in the communities. We've been engaging with people. ISR addresses a lot of the issues, but we have to respect the fact that there's been fear for years. So it's boots on the ground, talking to people and trying to educate in as many ways possible so they have all the information for good decision making. This past summer, we took a group of regulators and citizens to Crow Butte to show them an ISR operation. And anything we can do to help with the decision making. We're making progress. What we see are communities that want the jobs, that know the commodity is there, and it can do a lot to benefit the state. But you have to be respectful of people's feelings.
Well, talk to us about the team behind Verdera and how you plan to leverage their expertise to advance your projects, starting with yourself and why you're the right CEO to take the helm.
So my background, I ran a gold company. We produced gold in the Yukon. We uh, used an alternate process to extract gold that was non-cyanide based. I worked with numerous First Nations across the north and entered into many different agreements, socioeconomic exploration, won some awards for some of the projects that we were doing. So my background really is in community engagement and social licensing. I've been involved with communications as well through my career. 20 years in the public markets. I was the first CEO of Encore when it was Tigris Uranium. Handed the reins to Dr. Stover to take over once things started to look. We were buying assets really cheap at the time. So I stayed and did a lot of communications work with Encore. Recently worked with Grants Energy, which is part of General Atomics, to get them set up in New Mexico. And I was asked to come in because of that background with a real strong focus on community. Behind me, Bill Sheriff just announced that he's our executive chair, and Bill started and sold energy metals in the past during the 04 to 06 boom, founder of Encore Energy, brings a lot of good, solid background in the capital markets to the company. Kevin Bambro's on our board, previously was Sprott. Greg Hayes was my former CFO and audit chair in different companies. So strong financial strength there. Two key board members that are really important in New Mexico, John Indahl and Mark Paliza. Mark has spent his entire career in ISR, worked 10 years in New Mexico with URI, and is the lead director from Encore. And John Indahl is a lawyer. He's now retired in New Mexico. He's a senior policy advisor to the UPA, Uranium Producers of America. I gotta stop using all these acronyms, sorry. I hate when other people do it. Now I'm doing it. But John knows the regulations, and Mark knows the permitting, and that's going to become very important as we start to look at what we want to do at Ambrosia Lake and West Largo.
Walk us through some highlights on your projects, resource estimates, plans moving forward, infrastructure in place, and any other pertinent details that you think investors should be aware of.
As I mentioned, our qualifying transaction was Crown Point Hosta Butte, and that has 28 million pounds of indicated and inferred resources. That we think is our third best project. The Nose Rock project we have is our largest resource at about 35 million pounds. It's deep. It's at about 3,000 feet. And that's why we're paying a lot of attention to what Grants Energy is doing, because they're looking at the same formation, same depth. They're looking at horizontal drilling. So if successful, and they're well into their permitting process, they've got a private project that's 170 million pounds in New Mexico. That's going to really change the economics of Nose Rock. West Largo is Mark Paliza and Bill Sheriff's favorite project. It's 17 million pounds. It's all on private land. We're going to be doing an updated 43-101 on that project. The thing I really need to stress was all of our projects were developed by oil and gas companies, and they used very conservative numbers, and they used a cutoff grade of 0.5. And now what you're seeing in other jurisdictions is 0.2. So as we go and update the technical reports, we do expect to see some changes in the numbers. We will do some additional drilling around West Largo. It's all on private land, so we'll do some drilling around the periphery, which we hope will also have a positive impact on the numbers. Ambrosia Lake is my favorite project. It's my favorite project because it's a formerly operated underground mine. BHP has the northern 70%. We have the southern 30%. But under Rio Algum, they were doing what's called stope mining, where they were extracting water from the underground shafts and running it through a remote ion exchange facility at site, then shipping it in resin-filled trucks to a central processing plant off-site. So That one, I think, offers some really interesting opportunities for some near-term cash flow, and it's still going to take several years. But we'll start with doing some baseline work. So all of these projects, plus the scoping study for the central processing plant, which potentially may not even be in the state, we'll spend about half of our budget. As I mentioned, we have 25 million, so we'll go through that. That should last us a couple of years. The only other project I'll mention is Treeline. That was the last project ever developed by the oil and gas companies before 3 Mile Island slowed everything down. There's 1.5 million pounds there. We only use it as an example as a type of project that we see in our database if other companies are going to be considering coming into the state. We're going to have a lot of data to make available to them and really see the opportunities of doing some value add with the amount of data that we have they may require for the projects that they may be missing.
What is the company's current cash position? How much runway does that give you? And what are your plans for raising more capital as needed moving forward?
So we have about, about $25 million in the bank following our RTO and qualifying transaction. That should last us a couple of years under the current work plan. We'll spend about half of that this year on those projects. We don't have any plans for a capital raise at present, but when the market's agreeable, you have to look at it. We do want to look into the scoping study for a central processing plant, and that would obviously have changes to our plans and capital requirements.
And what are the main upcoming catalysts and news flow that investors can expect coming out of the company?
We just put out a news yesterday about our data acquisition that gives a lot more background on who Kerr-McGee was and the importance of the data. I think you'll start to see information flowing about our drill programs that will permit and our baseline work at Ambrosia Lake. And then we'll start to work into the scoping studies. So I think you'll see a good flow of information. We also have an upcoming conference that we've been backing. It's mid-April, and really to help educate people on the nuclear cycle and where we fit into it in New Mexico.
And is there anything we haven't yet covered or anything you think it's important to emphasize the potential shareholders of Verdera Energy should be focused on?
No, I think we've covered it all. You'll start to see a lot more information flow as we put our technical team together. John Hamrick's very important in that he's our lead advisor. John was with Union Carbide with production. He was with Cotter with reclamation. So we're putting together a team where there's a lot of data to go through. We have probably 120,000 drill hole logs. It's all paper, but it's full of gems that we've already been uncovering. And we'll be pulling together the two data sources in the next week. So you'll start to see some information there. And I think New Mexico's time has come. I think it's, people need to pay a little bit of attention to where it fits in the scheme of things in the U.S.
Great. Well, I'm going to put a link in the description below to the Verdera Energy website as well as social media for people who want to dive into the company and follow along. Janet, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your time and everybody else's. I know time is valuable, and thank you for giving me a bit of it.
Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.